Chinese is non-existent. The Chinese are very gracious. They speak a lot more English than I speak Chinese. Thank you, David. David did a much better introduction to Ellul than I am going to be able to do. I feel very inadequate here. I'm being asked to kick off the conference. Let's see if we can get some PowerPoint slides up here. Can we turn this on? Okay. Now, can I control it here? All right. So I tend to be a little just-in-time thinker and writer. I had a plan for what I was going to talk about, focusing on technique. As I tried to do that, I realized I really couldn't do it. So I've changed. I've made a shift. Rather than I originally intended to analyze the Protestant Ellul's response to my two fundamental questions here, whether and to what extent human subjectivity remains in a world of technique, or another way that Ellul put it, whether a new civilization might appear inclusive of technique. So I see those as the two statements of one crucial problem that Ellul and all of us are trying to address. And I originally intended to analyze Ellul's response to these questions by means of an analysis of his conception of technique, and to place Ellul beside the related but different responses of the Catholic Ivan Illich and the Jewish Leo Strauss. This is way too much. So obviously I can't do it. It forced me to a much truncated version. I've tried truncating over and over again, and what you're getting is the newest truncation, and I may not even get all through it because I only have 25 minutes. And okay? So what I'm going to try to do is to place Ellul within the framework of what I call classic European philosophy of technology discourse. And I'm going to suggest that Ellul opened a door to a critical philosophy of engineering, which he nevertheless failed fully to enter. Here's my argument, inadequately going to be realized. Ellul's diagnosis of technological society, for some strange reason, overlooks the true dynamism at the core of modern technology, and that's engineering. I find it remarkable that he talks over and over again about technology and technique and the technological system, but very, very seldom, and only as an aside does he mention an engineer or engineering. But engineering is at the core that creates the dynamic system that creates the technological world that we're in. I've taught at an engineering school for 25 years, three different engineering schools. That's where the heart is. Ellul didn't teach at an engineering school. He didn't work with engineers. I've had to try to do that. I think that's something that he missed doing. Engineering is, as I said, the dynamic home of technology. And I think this helps explain something I've noticed, that Ellul's trajectory of a marginalization in the philosophy of technology. In what I call the classic European phase in the 1950s and in the 1960s in the United States, he was very important. But he's dropped out of importance in philosophy of technology. He's important to you and us and our group, but the Ellul community is a very narrow community, unfortunately. So let me talk about the larger historical perspective of philosophy of technology. I divide it into four generations. The 1950s to 70s, I call the classic European generation. That took place in Europe, in which Ellul was one of the major contributors. In the 1970s, people in the United States, people like Langdon Winter and me, discovered what was going on in Europe and brought some of that to the United States and created what I call the classic American generation in the philosophy of technology. In the 1990s, something happened where Dutch engineers and philosophers learned from the United States the way people were thinking about it here and brought it back to Europe. Our Dutch colleagues out here will know in universities like Delft Technological University or Eindhoven and Twente and I can't pronounce it right. Where philosophers work with engineers in engineering schools to talk about the kinds of things that Ellul wanted to talk about. But they don't talk about Ellul because he doesn't seem to have relevance because he didn't do work with engineers. He doesn't talk about engineering and what's going on there. About 2015, I date it from, philosophy of technology broke out of the Euro-American context and went global. Because in 2015, Dongbei Daxue, the Northeastern University in Shenyang, China, hosted an international conference on the philosophy of technology. This was the first time that a conference on the philosophy of technology had brought together people from Asia and Europe and the United States. It was that, actually, that one of the things that got me involved in China. So here are some key features of these four generations. In the classic European phase, there was a focus on what Ellul himself calls Big T, or the technological system, or the technological phenomenon. The context was post-World War II destruction and reconstruction, and the presence of nuclear weapons and computers. In the 1970s, again, as I mentioned, the Americans gave what was going on in Europe a pragmatic twist, a twist of pragmatism. The person who I think of as originating philosophy of technology in the United States was Paul Durbin, a follower of John Dewey at the University of Delaware, and he organized the first philosophy of technology conference in the United States in 1975 at the University of Delaware. I was there. I think Langdon was there, Albert Boardman, Don Heide. It was a formative conference, and it wound up creating the Society for Philosophy and Technology. But what happened over the next 20 years was it became focused almost exclusively on ethics. Often in engineering schools, in teaching engineering ethics, but also in medical schools, teaching biomedical ethics, in computer programs, computer science programs, computer engineering programs, teaching computer ethics. So what was talking about Big T, technology as a whole, and what's happening to our world as a whole, became focused down into narrow areas like environmental ethics, computer ethics, nuclear ethics. So very, regionalized discussions. Now, it was this kind of doing of technology, particularly in philosophy, particularly in engineering schools and engineering ethics, that the Dutch latched onto and created what they call the empirical turn. Let's not talk about from outside what's going on in technology, mainly the creation of technology in engineering schools. Let's get into the engineering schools and work there with engineers to design better technologies, to design things differently. For the next 20 years, the empirical turn in the philosophy of technology has come to dominate philosophy of technology. In the world today, the most intense discussion of philosophy of technology is the Netherlands. Now, this is not accidental, I think. The Netherlands is an artifact. It is a technological creation. The Netherlands would not exist without massive technology infrastructures, all the dikes and the Deltawerken to keep back the ocean. 1/3 of the country is underwater if the ocean could get in, right? So it is wholly dependent upon engineering and engineering skills and massive engineering infrastructures. So the Dutch are just naturally primed to recognize the dependence upon engineering, not just technologies, but engineering in this working process of keeping the world working. and developing new ways to respond to new challenges. There's now more people studying philosophy of technology in the Netherlands than in any other country in the world, and yet it's a very small country. It's had an enormous impact throughout the world. The empirical turn of embedding yourself in engineering schools has been influential in the United States. It's been influential throughout countries in Europe, and now it's being influential in China. But the discussion, the discourse, as it's become global, has returned to the big T in two senses. One, talking about climate-related issues, and we need to ask questions about technology in general. Now let me return to the classic phase, because this is where Ellul began, where Ellul is an anchor. I identify three different approaches to doing philosophy of technology that originated in the 1950s in Europe. One I call analytic philosophy of technology. An anchor figure is Alan Turing in his famous paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. There's a phenomenological approach pioneered by Martin Heidegger, whose Die Frage der Nachttechnik is an anchor text. And then there's the sociological approach, in which Ellul is an anchor figure. There are terminological complexities. I originally planned to talk a lot about this, because machine, technique, technology, Lewis Mumford's techniques, mega machine, Langdon Winter's use of the term techniques, these are all different ways of trying to identify something which is not clearly identified. Technology is not, as Paul Kripke would say, a rigid designator. It can mean sort of different aspects of some one thing we have trouble trying to get a handle on. These are different terms that pick out and highlight different aspects of that whatever it is, that thing, that phenomena, that event, in Heidegger's terms, that generates the fundamental philosophical, theological question of our time. And I think the principle of charity is the proper way to respond, to try to figure out in each of these terms and the way they're used, what can contribute to a more global understanding. I realize my time is driving me faster through here, so I'm going to say, I just mentioned again Alan Turing. He's the only one of these three people who became a movie star in the Imitation Game. But the argument in Computing Machinery and Intelligence is a hint to the way analytic philosophy works. He takes a question like, can a machine think, and says, look, that's very fuzzy, it's unclear, let's replace it with this question, which is more philosophical, but it's unclear, by another which is closely related to it, but is expressed in unambiguous words, and we can solve it. That's a technological solution to a philosophical problem. And that's become a way of doing analytic philosophy of technology. But Turing's, well, I'm going to skip some of this. Turing has been influential over the three great booms in artificial intelligence. Martin Heidegger was a very different perspective. He's one of the two or three most consequential philosophers of the 20th century. His fundamental problem is a different statement than the way I stated it, the fundamental problem for Ellul. The problem of nihilism, or the cultural loss of an ability to think, in his terms, being or sein. Being in time replaces, he wants to replace the Platonic Christian horizon of eternity with one of time, of temporality, as the framework of human existence. Unfortunately, he affirmed his own historical facticity in 1933 by joining the Nazi Party and never renouncing it. But his question concerning technique has a different structure. His concern is to try to take this technique and distinguish a modern definition of technique, a modern phenomenon of technique, from a pre-modern Greek phenomenon of technique, and by reflecting on the modern phenomena to disclose to uncover the way in which it discloses the reality of the world. And his argument is that modern technique discloses being or reality as simply resource, as bestand, something we can do anything with that's available for universal manipulation. But that's what opens the world to engineering. That's what engineers do. So his identification of reality as bestand, this framework that gives us a new kind of understanding of reality, enables the activation of a dynamism that produces the world of technologies that Ellul and others are concerned about, the way it affects and restructures society. Heidegger's insight is that every revealing is at the same time a hiding. Modern technique, in Greek techne, bring forth into presence but simultaneously occlude. Greek techne discloses being as physis, nature, growth, whereas technique discloses being as bestand, designable, available for appropriated resources, which makes being open to engineering. Legacies. Turing remains a dominant figure in the world today. Its origins in the classic European period, but he's talked about as much today as he was in the 1950s. During the classic period, when it was brought to America, classic American period, Turing and Heidegger and Ellul had some kind of equal prominence. They were all mentioned, all discussed. Some of their ideas were developed. In the Dutch school, Heidegger is recreated as a positive phenomenologist of technology by Don Eide and others in what Don Eide calls post-phenomenology or mediation theory. But Ellul sort of drops out because they consider him, like David said, they consider him anti-technology. But I think that's not just because they're opposed to Ellul, it's they don't see Ellul listening and talking to engineers. In the period of globalization in which we are now, there's a greater pluralism, and I think there's an opportunity for Ellul to return. So let me say a word finally about Ellul. Ellul considered himself a Marxist to some extent. He wanted to revise Marxism. It's no longer the economic system of capitalism that is the base or dominant influence on society. Now it's technique or technology. Now, if we look at the basic structure of Marx's basic argument, that the base influences the superstructure, but then the superstructure can in turn influence the base. And for Ellul, this base is no longer simply mass industrial production and the pursuit of profit and capitalism. It is, I would replace Ellul's technology or technique with engineering. I think that's a better description of what the base is now than to talk about technique. It's engineering. And that engineering influences the superstructure. We all love engineering. The word of the day now is we're going to solve all problems with innovative engineering or entrepreneurial engineering. The three engineering schools that I've taught over the course of my career are all so engaged in the belief that engineering, they don't talk in terms of technology. It's engineering through innovation that's going to deal with all the problems that come up. What Ellul characterizes as the technological base in terms of artificiality, semi-autonomous, self-determining progress in its own way, I think much of that can apply to the engineering method and the way engineering is taught and practiced. Okay, I'm going to skip some of this. I'm running out of time. In the last book, the next to the last book on technology, which David again mentioned, The Technological System, Ellul recognized some of the problems with using the concept of efficiency as a way to define what technology is, as a kind of human action or process. And he tried to reply to that by drawing on social systems analyses of Talcott Parsons and Nicholas Luhmann. But he was also influenced by a great techno-anthropologist, I like to call him, Gilbert Simondon. And Ellul argued that technology too had become a, quote, system of elements interrelated in such ways that any evolution of one triggers the revolution in the whole, and any modification in the whole replications in the element of each element. But before, and more than a social scientific concept, system was an engineering concept. He doesn't talk about it as an engineering concept. The concept of a social system was an attempt to take engineering, systems engineering, and apply it to society. There are 4 techno-anthropologists that I think deserve to be brought into the effort to interpret and advance Ellul's thinking. One is André Leroi-Gourhan, who Ellul himself in the Technological Society admits was an influence on him. His concept of technological operations is drawn from Leroi-Gourhan. He also spends a lot of time in the technological system talking about Gilbert Simondon's work. 2 people who have carried forward that work of Leroi-Gourhan and Simondon are Bernard Stiegler, who just died 2 years ago, and his Technique in Time, Volume 1. There's I think 4 or 5 volumes of it. And the latest is Jacques, who did a PhD under Stiegler. And Jacques', I think, incredible book, The Question Concerning Technology in China, takes Heidegger and Simondon and Ellul and tries to use them to rethink the way technology should be thought from the perspective of Chinese experience. Conclusion. Ellul powerfully describes the transformative character of modern technology on social life, but fails adequately to investigate the character of engineering as that dynamic method and process that produces modern technologies. This helps explain Ellul's trajectory of marginalization in the philosophy of technology and offers a path for returning Ellul to the center of philosophy of technology discourse. That's a little bit. I couldn't do any more in the amount of time that I have.